Hello Excel friends, so we're going to use Facebook's geographic revenue data, and we're going to use this to explore how to use the summary values in the status bar, how to work with the functions count, average, and sum. We're going to look at different ways that we can enter these particular functions. We're going to learn how to recognize and work with cell error warnings. We're going to understand how Excel treats numeric values, and we're going to review how to make range selections using not only the mouse but the keyboard. So let's get at it. So we're going to open up our worksheet named Facebook. We're going to use functions in B7 through B9. We're going to enter those functions three different ways. We're going to make the range selections three different ways. We're also going to pay attention to how Excel treats B2 because sometimes we want something to be a label, but Excel thinks that it's a number. So it's important to pay attention to those issues as well. Let's go ahead and create things. Now, before we get started entering data into our spreadsheet, I want to show you that there's a way that you can quickly get very popular summary figures simply by making a selection. So I'm going to select B3 through B6. And if you look down in the lower right-hand corner of your worksheet, you'll see that you get a value for average, count, min, max, and sum. Now, if you right-click on this, there are actually different ways that you can customize this, but these are considered to be the big five functions that folks use most frequently. And if you ever want to go ahead and just get a quick gander at what some of these figures are, you can simply make a selection and look down below. Now, of course, there's no formatting in here. That's really, the kind of thing that you'd want to do in your spreadsheet, but that's a good way for us to get started and to know that that exists, and it can be a handy tool for us. But now let's get started working with the spreadsheet. So we've got our count label in A7. If I want to work with the count function, I can type an equal sign in B7 and type the word count, and we can see that autocomplete starts to type in anything which starts with the letters that I've typed in. Now, I actually want this first selection here, which is the count function. So if I press the tab key, we see that Excel actually writes that out for me. It does an open parenthesis, and it's waiting for my selection. So I can now go up here and click and hold down my mouse on B3, drag down to B6. We can see the range is in here, B3 to B6. If I press enter, Excel will complete the function by adding the right parenthesis, and in fact it does a count. The 4 means there are 4 values from B3 to B6. Now you'll also notice this little green triangle in the upper left-hand corner. This is an error indicator, and Excel is warning us that it sees something is in this cell that breaks a rule that Excel uses to check for problems. Now, in many cases, you can go ahead and ignore these warnings, but if you're curious what they are and you want to make sure that you haven't made an error, you can click in the cell and explore what this warning is all about. So I'm going to click into B7 and then notice the yield symbol over on the left-hand side. I'm going to click in there and I can see this little information ball, the blue ball with the eye in it, says formula omits adjacent cells. Now what that means is it takes a look at cell B2 and says, hey, that's a number. And I've noticed that your formula here includes the range B3 through B6, but you don't have B2 in there, and that's also a number. Now, I actually don't want to include cell B2 in my range, so I could just leave this and not pay attention to the little triangle. But if I wanted to get rid of it because I don't want to see it on the worksheet, I can also go down here to the selection that says ignore error, and the triangle will go away. Now for average, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in cell B8, and I could type equal average, but I want to show you another technique. I'm going to go up here to auto sum, and instead of clicking on auto sum just to the right, I get a drop down arrow. And when I click on that drop down arrow, I see the big 5 functions that Excel puts in here by default. Average is one of them since it's a commonly used function, so I'm going to select average, but I want you to notice what's going to go into cell B8 when I select average. So what Excel does is it takes a look above this function and it highlights all of the numbers it can find. Now this is a selection I don't want to make because 2018 isn't meant to be treated like a number, it's meant to be treated like a label. Also, I don't want to average the count 4 in here either. So I'm just going to move my cursor up. Notice that Excel has very handily highlighted the range B2 to B7. So if I click in B3, drag down to B6, the range changes to B3 colon B6. I press enter and I get the appropriate average in here. Once again, I can see in my cell that I've got the triangle in the upper left-hand corner. If I click in there, I get the yield symbol. It also tells me that it's omitting items in adjacent cells. In this case, Excel says, hey, you got a number down here and a number up here. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and ignore that. You don't have to worry about that. It's not going to distort your spreadsheet at all. But if you see those, you can certainly check the error, and if you want to get rid of that little triangle, you can certainly use the technique we just showed. Now for sum, I'm going to click in here to get the total in B9. I'm going to click on the auto sum button. Notice Excel has highlighted all the numbers just above the formula as part of the range. That's B2 through B8. And that's not what I want. So I'm going to use a different technique now to make the range selection that I want. So instead of using my mouse, I'm going to use my arrow keys. And the very first cell that I've got selected up here is B2, and it's highlighted the range to B8. But if I press the down arrow, I can see now that I'm in B3. Also notice what's happened in between the parentheses. So B3 is my entire range here. It's not a range, it's just the simple cell address. But if I hold down the Shift key on my keyboard now, and then continue to press the down arrow once, twice, and 3 times, I can see that I've made a range selection from B3:B6. So just by holding down the Shift key, when you move your cursor keys, you can make a selection just like you were with a mouse. And if I press Enter here, I've got an appropriate sum. Once again, I get this this highlight here that shows me that I've got an error. I'm going to ignore the error, and I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to format B3 through B6 as well as B8 and B9 as accounting figures without decimals. Now remember, I can highlight from B3 to B6. I can either use my mouse or I can use the cursor technique. So I'm going to use my arrow key to move up to cell B3, hold down the Shift key, and select a B6. And now, if I hold down my Command key on my Mac or my Control key on Windows, I can click on cell B8 and drag to B9, and I've made a discontinuous selection here. All of the cells that I've highlighted, when I click on accounting here, it changes them to a $ format. I can remove the decimal places here, and this is the result that I'd wanted. So hopefully you found that interesting. We have gone ahead and learned 3 different ways that we could enter some of the big 5 functions. We've learned that we can make selections in different ways. We also learned to pay attention to the selections that Excel makes for our functions, because if it sees a number in there, it will treat that as part of the continuous selection that it makes for the function, but sometimes we don't want that, so we'll override it either by a selection or by moving our cursor keys and selecting the Shift key. So, hope you found that interesting and useful. Keep at it.